Great, we're recording. Again, thanks for joining us. My name is Charlie, work for Forterra, and I would like to introduce you to one of our partners who is also joining us with the City of Seattle, Kim Foley, who works for the Trees for Seattle program.
Hi, everyone. We're so glad that you all could be here and join us this evening for this exciting session. A little bit about us. I work with the Trees for Seattle program at the City of Seattle, and we're the city's umbrella urban forestry program. We work with all departments throughout the city on anything to do with trees. We partner along with Forterra. We partner with SDOT, City Light, Seattle Parks, SDCI. And our program, Trees for Seattle, is really focused on engaging the community in tree stewardship. For those of you who are familiar with our work, we usually like to get our hands dirty and get out on the ground, in person, working with folks like yourselves and working in community on caring for and planting trees. And unfortunately, we can't do that right now. So we do have tools like this where we can stay in touch and continue these conversations about why trees are important in our communities and be in touch until we can be outside planting trees once more. So thank you all for being here. I see a handful of folks out there from our Tree Ambassadors program. It's so excited to see you all, miss you all, and I hope you enjoy this session.
Thanks so much, Kim. I also want to give a shout out to Lou Stubecki, who is he's a professional arborist, also works for the Trees for Seattle program. He's the one who is giving out free trees for the Trees for Neighborhood program. So it's a pretty cool program the city has. I also wanted to mention that if you do want to join with video, when you signed in, it automatically had your video off. To turn that on, if you go to hover your mouse to the bottom of the screen, you can click on a start video button too. Great. So every year, our Tree Ambassador program, along with our volunteering events, we have several workshops that we offer to our Tree Ambassador volunteers, usually about tree identification or other topics around urban forestry. So I'm just really excited that even though we can't have our volunteering events, that we can still do this. And this is one of my favorite parts of the program because I love learning. And so we're not going to be doing official introductions. Typically at this time, I'd have folks stand up and share a little bit about themselves, where they're coming from, and what their interest in this topic is. Those can get a little unwieldy over this platform. When we open up to open discussion later on, feel free to introduce or give your name before you speak then. But just to get a sense of where folks are coming from, I'm going to launch a little poll just to see what your experience with urban forestry is so far. So that should be showing up on your screen right now, and I'll share that in a little bit. I am just really excited right now then to introduce our speaker. She is a University of Washington social science research scientist. And I will say that her research on the social benefits of trees and the urban canopy is often cited by programs like us and similar programs. And she is self-described as way too busy, and you can often see that she's giving presentations around the country. So we're really fortunate that she is able to speak with our group today, and we're so lucky to have her. Kathy Wolf will give it away to you.
Okay. Thanks, Charlie. And I'll try to share screen, and hopefully this works.
Great. And again, that poll is still going on. I will close that in about 30 seconds or so, and I'll share that with everybody so everybody sees where folks are coming from.
All right. Good evening, everyone. I really appreciate this opportunity to share with the tree ambassadors and other interested people here in the Seattle area, maybe beyond. We don't know with these Zoom platforms necessarily. And recognizing that it is evening, it is late in the week, we're all busy, lots, not to mention a lot of unusual and important things happening in our city and across the country. I'm going to bring some content about trees, about why we need trees in our communities. And as Charlie mentioned, in the Tree Ambassador Program and other programs, student programs, professional programs, we talk a lot about how to grow trees, how to plant trees, how to prune trees, how to mulch trees, and so on. And my niche in all of this is the why. Why is this necessary? Why do we need these living things around us? And so I'll start with this. We were, those of us who got on early, organizers of the event, we were talking about, yes, this Zoom webinar platform, everything that's going on. Everyone just take a deep breath and think about your connection with trees. I find that trees, as this quote expresses, they give me a sense of perspective. They give me a sense in this time of anxiety and emotion and uncertainty. They give me a connection to time in the past and going forward. And 2 days ago, I was invited long ago, but I was prepared to give a lecture to graduate students in environmental health at the University of Washington. And given the protests that were going on downtown, all the events around the nation, there were some students that jumped right in and said, really? Nature and health? Is that really relevant in what's going on right now? And I've been working on this for decades, and I wanted to jump right back at them and say, yes, of course it is. But I didn't. I restrained myself. But that is something I think we encounter, is with all of the events currently going on, political, social, economic, people may not recognize the value of connecting with trees, of the respite, of the solace that trees can provide. And so I'm going to talk about some of that from a more academic, scientific perspective. But nonetheless, I mean, this quote and this sort of relationship with trees is what motivates me to continue the work. I have 3 distinct units of content here. One is I have worked with some colleagues and we have a paper in review that is a set of articles, 200 articles, studies about trees and health. Trees specifically, not urban greening generally, but trees specifically, and health outcomes from community of science, from people working all over the world to understand these relationships. The second is, and I'm getting a lot of requests about this of late from not only academic sources, but also from public, more popular media. For instance, I was interviewed by a videographer with AccuWeather about trees and mental health. AccuWeather, that was a first for me. So that's the second unit that I have here. And again, it's more evidence-based. Those 2 I have prepared and talked about a number of times. They're fairly settled presentations. The third, though, I interpret from that evidence what might be the dosage, what might be the amount of contact with trees that is of value to us, including big trees and some of the issues that we now see with tree restoration across our metropolitan Seattle area. So again, a couple of days ago, talking with the students, after we negotiated, if you will, what the class was going to be and what the discussion was going to be, I settled into my presentation, but it changed quite a bit. So what I offer to you, given where we are in this moment in time, where your head is, where perhaps you have been over the last few days, maybe participating in the protests or other activities. Charlie's now going to put up a poll, and I can proceed 1, 2, 3 if you'd like, or I can jump about, and we'll see what the preferences of the group, and I'll respond to that in how I proceed with this talk. So Charlie, if you would please put up that poll. Oh, here's the result of the first one.
I'm going to share the results of the first one, and then and then, yeah, let's get this next one going.
So what we're asking is, which of those topics most interest you? The general overview of research, number 1, a focus on the benefit of trees and nature for mental health, or Kathy's ramble about dosage and equity and tree protection, a less settled presentation, but maybe more in the moment. Or if you want, I'll proceed as I first drafted all of this.
All right, we have about 83% of folks have voted. And so just waiting on 1 or 2 people. And
I'll also call out, particularly since we have a fairly small group here tonight, make use of the chat box. I have been on some webinars where there's been a very dynamic flow of chat commentary, and I will look at that as I'm speaking. And if there are some questions or comments made while I'm speaking, and I happen to pick that up, I'll fold that into what I'm talking about.
so Kathy, it looks like most folks are interested in your initial outline, but there's a pretty strong contingency that are pretty excited to hear about your health equity and nature dosage.
Yes, so I'll be sure to allot enough time for that as we had planned. Great. Well, you've just made it all a lot easier for me not to have to jump around within the presentation. So I will start with this review of the evidence. There are literally thousands of articles, thousands of studies that have been done across the world with regard to urban nature, urban greening, and health response. And so what we have done as a team, which I'll sort of introduce here in a moment, we wanted to learn more specifically about trees, because urban greening can include parks, it can include green stormwater infrastructure, it can include a variety of types of spaces, both naturalistic as well as more formal. So we wanted to learn about trees and health response. And it's important to consider a changing dynamic and understanding of health across the health professions. And that is this idea of social determinants of health. So often our conversations about health in the United States, they focus on healthcare. They focus on, can you go to the doctor? Are you able to see a health professional? Are you able to go to the hospital? But really, what's important is that we address all of the circumstances that influence health, that influence whether we retain or we protect our wellness. And still not quite in that discourse in public health is the role of nature and trees. That's gradually changing, gradually improving. But housing, education, access to good jobs, well-paying jobs or living wage jobs, add to that the presence of green in our everyday surroundings as contributing to that state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being. And so to understand the role of trees in health, we've done this scoping review. These things take far longer than we ever expected. Took us a couple of years. And I've really enjoyed, I did this with some collaborators in Canada, Natural Resources Canada and Health Canada, the national level agencies. And our team, and this was an unusual experience for me in that I worked with people who are trained and educated in public Most of my work has been collaborations with natural resource and urban forestry professionals. But here we had people who are active professionals in urban planning as well as public health. And then Matilda Vandenbosch, a doctor, a physician. And also the partner of Cecil Conendijk, who a name you might recognize. He has really published extensively about the social dynamics and governance of urban forestry. They're kind of a dynamic duo. They're really amazing people to be around. Share a glass of wine or a coffee. Wow, it sends my brain kind of, it hurts. All right, for this project, what we did, typical review process for academics, but I'll walk through this a little bit. First, you do a keyword search. There are science databases. So you dump in a bunch of keywords, and you get this just overwhelming list of articles. So we screen that. We screen for, are they relevant? Are there duplications, and so on. So we get down to a list of about 400. Then we look at the abstracts and the titles. Again, another screening, the next level of screening for relevance, duplication, quality of the science. For instance, some articles are more sort of testimonials, if you will, and we put those aside. Valuable, but we put those aside. Then we did a science quality assessment, applying some of the standards of doing science, sampling, statistical approaches, and so on. And our final set of studies then numbered 200. So again, I remind you that there are literally thousands, 2,000 to 3,000 by my reckoning. There may be more. Those that focus on trees, we discovered about 200, and this was up until the beginning of 2018. So what did we find? Now this figure is kind of complicated, so let me walk through it a bit. First of all, on the left, we have the different experiences of trees that were represented in the studies. It's everything from people encountering or seeing a single tree, trees in the parks, canopy cover and its relationship to health outcomes, often over a very large geographic area. Forest immersion, the forest bathing and therapy literature that's coming along. And then there were laboratory studies where people were presented images or video simulations of trees in some way. One there I'll call out is pollen. There was quite a good number of studies about pollen, and I'll come back to that in a little bit. All right, that center bar there, reducing harm, building capacities, restoring capacities. I won't talk about that very much here. Go read the article. It's not published yet if you want to learn more about that, but it should be out in, I'm hoping, a couple of months. Then we look at the health responses, respiratory condition, heat and thermal comfort, cognition, mental health functions, clinical outcomes. So did people have a diagnosed disease or illness and they improved with contact with trees? Active living, being out, being active, controlling weight, controlling propensity for chronic disease. So all of these were represented in this collection of 200 studies. Then the final column to the right, this one really surprised me, sort of, but the degree of distribution of these studies across decades. Look at that. Look at what has been published in the last 10 years, less than 10 years compared to prior decades. I graduated in the 90s. Wasn't a lot to work with then in terms of doing these sorts of talks or even envisioning who would fund this sort of research. Now there's far more opportunity and there are far more scientists coming to it. And the pace of this is just growing rapidly. So we see in the last decade how much more publication. That pace is continuing to accelerate. So the bands that flow across then represent the number of articles. So for pollen, quite a large number, relatively speaking, of articles. The publication dates, you could see the concentration of articles. But notice then those various health outcomes, quite a nice range, quite a nice distribution. And so what that suggests is the why why do we need trees in our communities? There are many, many good reasons with respect to health. And when I speak to people about this casually, you know, family, friends, out somewhere, someone asks me, what do you do? And in there, often the response is, oh yeah, I heard about that hospital study, you know, where people saw trees or a brick wall. Or I heard this one about ADHD. And what we can say, though, is there's much more going on in this world of science and evidence. There's much more that we can say about the importance of trees. Let me dig in a little bit more. Some of the elements of that chart, here again, we see number of articles by decade, and that sweep, the line, if you just run a line across the tops of those columns, that line is continuing in terms of publication rate. We saw a variety of tree exposures, tree experiences, single trees, trees in parks, immersion, and so on. And even simulations. That one image there that's credited to the University of Utah. That was fascinating. Nalini Nadkarni is a restoration ecologist. She once worked here at the Evergreen College in Olympia, is now in Utah. But she has started a prison project to help, to enable inmates to participate in restoration ecology by way of growing organisms that can be taken to the field. Anyway, she convinced the prison officials to set up this screen that was a digital representation of nature. And they found reduced aggression in those inmates that chose to participate, and reduced infractions against the staff of the prison. Very small sample, questionable results, but very, very interesting. And she's continuing to follow up on those types of studies. What did we learn? Again, this is a distribution of the numbers of articles by the health response, by the health outcome. Let me comment, and you can see again, quite an interesting range: physiological health, mental health, social interactions, lots of things going on here. And of course, they're interlaced. There are a lot of mediating things going on, but we've got a really rich story here. But let me talk about tree pollen. What we found was there in the article databases that are oriented to doctors have a propensity of these tree pollen studies. And what do? They take a bit of pollen from that tree, that tree, that tree. They do little prick tests on the skin, a typical allergy response test, and they found certain allergic reactions, not surprising. But that then has translated, because there were numerous articles that did that, that has translated to, I think, a bias on the part of the medical community to think only about trees and health in terms of pollen and allergic reaction. So that is something that I'm working with some physicians now we're trying to figure out how to introduce the breadth of these sorts of benefits, still recognizing that pollen is a concern, of course, and should play into the planning and management of our urban forest, but not to dwell on that as the health outcome that they're aware of. So let's see. Let me now give you a sampling of some of the studies that appeared in this review. The first is canopy cover and baby birth weight. Jeff Donovan is in Portland. He's with the Forest Service. He was the first to do a study like this, got all sort of blowback about the quality of the science, and are you kidding, and all. These studies have been replicated now in London, Los Angeles, Vancouver, British Columbia, and fairly consistent. Having more green around your home when you're pregnant seems to be associated with healthier birth weight. We don't know why. It might be stress reduction. It might be better social support because you're outdoors and connected with people. We don't know the why, but this is a fairly consistent association. You've probably heard about these studies. They were done some time ago in Chicago. Francis Kuo or Ming Kuo and Bill Sullivan. There's more recent research to confirm this, finding that children, when they're outdoors and in forested spaces, immersion, that there are reduced ADHD symptoms. Not elimination of ADHD, but perhaps to the point where children are not taking as powerful drugs to control ADHD, or not being able to do so intermittently, saving money and perhaps even reducing long-term effects of some of these medications. There's some serious mind changing medications associated with ADHD. As children get older, they go to school, and some studies are showing that here was one about 10 years ago. There are some that are more recent, suggesting that having trees and green on our campuses can have an effect on school performance, standardized testing, interest in going on to university or graduation, improved graduation rates. If you are interested in particular about nature and children, not just trees, but nature and children generally, the Children and Nature Network is an excellent resource. It's a website. Richard Lou's book, Last Child in the Woods, was one of the instigators. He and his colleagues were the instigator of the Children and Nature Network, and they have wonderful web pages for the research evidence, for activities you can do with children in nature, and maybe a good resource if you're working with people whose children are learning from home, online, maybe a supplement this summer, some activities that you might do, or even as a supplement to school curricula with regard to nature. Physical activity, so important. A few of us were talking about how our physical activity patterns have changed since we've been in the hunker down, as my daughter calls it. And so this was a review, again, multiple studies, and what they found was activity is good. Yes, obviously, activity is good for physiological health. It's also good for mental health. But these studies revealed that being outdoors provided additional benefit over and above being indoors, being in a gym, wherever that situation might have been. And part of this is routine is important to gain these benefits. And what they found is that people who were active outdoors were more inclined to repeat the activity, to be engaged in physical activity in a more durable way. And so those of you who have an interest in parks, forested parks, natural areas that have trails, that is such an important resource for people in order to afford and enable outdoor activity. But you do have to get out of the car. That's the important part here, is leave the car behind for a while. And of course, physically distance. And that's something that is a challenge in our parks now, as I understand it. Okay, some of you, probably many of you, have a science background, and you're thinking, all right, yeah, all these trees and health benefits, okay. The people, we know patterns in cities, people who are more affluent have more trees in their community, so that's why they're more affluent, so that's why their health is better. And I just want to point out, in doing this review, we looked carefully at what is known as confounders in public health and social science. And that is the attributes that do influence health to the extent they can through census data or local demographic data. They control for these factors, and they find that across all socioeconomic dimensions that people display these benefits. And then I'll end, I think I'm ending this section with some really interesting work that's going on in Philadelphia. The Pennsylvania Horticultural Society is a long-term nonprofit dedicated to greening the city. And they do these vacant lot transformations, remove the debris, do the mowing, clean it up, put in some trees, put in a little fence. Fence is important not to keep people out, but to indicate this is now tended. It belongs to someone. And it tends to lead to decline in crime. And that's what they found. There have been stories about that over the years, but through collaborations with some universities and the Forest Service, they have found less crime as well as some additional health response across the residents living near these very small parcels, exhibiting a really modest level of green improvement. So that was a quick splash. Quick review, overview, just a sampling of the 200 studies we looked at, thousands more if we consider greening more broadly, natural systems and cities. But look across this, from the very earliest hours of our lives to the very ends of our lives, we see in these articles health benefits for people. And so no matter which neighborhood, which community, which campus, you know, be it a care center for elders, or be it a place, a hospital with a birthing area, maybe providing access to a garden, these benefits are displayed. So before moving into the first number 3, oops. I was a little bit of a hurry earlier today, obviously. If we want to take a few minutes now for questions and comments, this is the time. A few minutes here.
Yeah, I haven't seen any questions pop up yet in the group chat, but if anybody just wanted to, yeah, to like raise their hand, or if you wanted to share something, feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question. If you don't know how to unmute yourself, just take your mouse to the bottom right hand of the screen and just click on the button that says unmute.
So I'm looking at the chat, and Barbara made the comment, that makes total sense to me. And I totally agree. You know, I spoke about Richard Louv in his book. I was a free range child. I lived in a rural neighborhood, roamed freely with siblings and friends. And then my background, I started with studies in biology, an undergraduate degree in biology, then landscape architecture, and then this work prompted by graduate work in environmental psychology. So to me, all of this just makes so much sense. And I sometimes feel like my research confirms the obvious. But if we think about where our investments are in our cities, they're not meeting the level of evidence that we know about green and health. Parks, trees, maybe less so in Seattle, but in many communities are seen as, oh yeah, whatever, they're pretty, but you know, we have to take care of fire and emergency response and utilities, and I don't think we've come to the understanding that having connected, quality, accessible nature systems, including trees and the urban forest, is a health promotion utility. It's an infrastructure system. So that becomes my challenge, is trying to extend what we know intuitively and story and evidence to people who don't yet get it and yet make really important decisions in our communities.
Dr. Wolf, can I say something?
Yes, please.
Oh, you know, I started going to the UW in '62, and then later on, it used to be a lot of green grass at the UW, and then they built what they call Red Square, and they've just got so many buildings around there. It's a horrible place. It changed everything when they started paving over the green areas, for me anyway. I went to school over many years. So it was, I stopped after 2 years, and then I came back later as an adult with kids and stuff. And it just, it had a different feeling. I didn't like it.
Yeah. And it has continued to change. I have colleagues who serve on an advisory committee for campus change.
Mhm.
And anytime there's a donation for a new building, they're just, oh, not again. We're losing some of these big, beautiful trees, the green spaces. And there again, despite the efforts of this committee, I'm not sure that there's a sense of the connectivity of the green spaces across the campus for the benefit of students, staff, and faculty. And I have a colleague at Cornell University, Don Rocco, and he has initiated a campus greening for therapeutic benefits for students program, because depression rates, suicide rates, anxiety rates in university students are just soaring now. And so he and colleagues, he just released a book a short while ago about this topic. He and his colleagues are trying again to elevate or amplify this message about the importance of everyday greening, not going away far to the mountains and the beach. That's fun, it's good, I do it. But having nearby everyday nature is of incredible benefit. And again, the institutional and administrative decision makers and thought leaders of our communities and spaces, I'm not sure they get this yet.
Oh,
I'm noticing a number of questions, Kathy, on just applications of this research. One person was asking about efforts. Penny asked if there were efforts to include into education programs for landscape architects, and then also Jane was asking about how like the influences on politicians and policymakers, and especially in which what sectors of policymakers are resistant to this information.
Yeah, there's a lot in that question. So I'll take a couple of different pieces of it, and then if we want to continue, you can follow up and come back with some more of this. First, landscape architects. I was, admittedly, for a very short amount of time, a practicing landscape architect. It was the bridge between my master's and PhD work. And there are a lot of landscape architects who intuitively understand nature and health, and yet sometimes their designs are actually contrary to what we know from this evidence in how they assemble nature elements and the character of the spaces they create. I would say there are some schools of landscape architecture that are better than others at incorporating this more formal evidence. And there are very few firms that do post-occupancy evaluations. There are very few firms that will take the time or have the budget, that's usually the limitation, to conjecture or assume, provide an assumption about how their spaces will influence people, and then actually follow up and evaluate that. So that's an opportunity that I have once in a while. Other influencers, I'll mention urban planners. They have this oversight on these incredible linked systems in our cities, right? And not a lot of them, there are some, but not a lot of them see this as an essential piece of what they do. And I'm hoping there will be some movement on that. Over the past year, the American Planning Association has been mobilizing groups of people to talk about their first research agenda, the first research agenda for urban planning. It's called Future Shape, has not been released yet. It was delayed by the COVID-19 complications. And so I think it'll probably come out within this next 6 months. I was invited to serve on the committee. And they said, yes, we'd like to learn about health and nature. So I arrived and I was in this group. We had a couple of meetings in Chicago and a bunch of webinar conferences. And I was in the midst of all of these people that are the stars of urban planning. And yet they kept, Kathy, tell us about nature and health. Tell us about, so there was a curiosity there was a sense of, I think, emerging commitment, and this content will be in the Future Shape research agenda. So I think that's a really good first step in us reaching the urban planning audience or urban planning professionals. Engineering, maybe a little more obstacle there, though. Willamette Partnership in Portland teamed up with a number of partners, and they have a green infrastructure and health and equity document out. Came out maybe 2 years ago. And it's a really good primer on how to engage with the community with regard to environmental equity, and then what are the elements of infrastructure, particularly green stormwater infrastructure, that can enable or amplify some of these health outcomes.
Thanks, Kathy. I'm noticing that there's a lot of questions also around just like trees and equity and some I would like just like trees and affordability, excuse me, and density, and trees and like low income housing. I don't know if this is a good segue into your third section, if maybe since we're going a little bit over that, if we want to jump over to that one, if that might be good for our next session.
Okay. So Charlie, would you suggest I do that now, or do we want to stay and continue? I see some more. Okay. I will leave the timing to you, Charlie. You suggest when and where I'm traveling here.
Let's move on, just because we're going a little bit behind our schedule.
Okay.
We're already past halfway of the time that we have. So
okay.
Let's go to that third topic of dosage equity and big trees.
Okay, I will do that.
And I can also, I don't know if anyone else, but I can try to answer some questions a little bit in the chat, just with some resources that I know about. And then if you can get back to them, we'll have time to go back to them. So I'll try to do a little of that for some people.
Okay.
Thanks, Allie.
Yeah, thanks, Sally. And frankly, anyone else who has resources that they can share, links, books, reports, individuals, please, by all means.
This is John Barber. I'm posing as David Mooring on this conversation, and I'm interested in urban habitat restoration and wondering where there are any studies. I know we've been doing it in my neighborhood for 25 plus years now, working on trying to restore the native habitat character of the natural areas in our area, and studies having to do with benefits for volunteers who do that, or results or preferences in recreational use of urban habitat, or do people want an authentic experience with restored urban habitat into the native character of the landscape.
Thank you for the question and the punctuation, doggy sounds. So I've got a little bit about that here in these slides. So if you don't mind, I'll proceed. And again, everyone, the caveat here, probably some of you do public speaking. What I find is the first time through some content, you're like, there's some bumpy spots, and you fine tune, you swing over. And the second time it gets a little better, but you're not quite there. Third time you settle in and it becomes something that goes fairly smoothly. I'm nowhere near the going smoothly on this section. So I'll track through some slides, and I have a feeling I'll touch on some of the questions, particularly the one that just came up. And if not, we'll just continue the conversation. So this again is some of the work that I've been doing currently, is to try to understand how do we take this evidence to meaning, to action in communities. And here was one effort. It was with a group of people at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. And we attempted to translate this, a lot of that content that was in the review article, the 200 studies, into what does this mean for where you put trees around buildings or in a parcel or on a campus. And so I'm finding that the linkage of climate impacts, increased heat, different rainfall patterns, other different air pollution patterns, climate and trees for health seems to be a linkage that's getting a little traction with our more non-traditional partners, public health, urban planning, and so on. So I offer that is maybe you identify, as you talk to people about why we need trees and tree retention, identify what are, not climate by term, because that's, some people don't respond to that, but what are the issues coming to us associated with climate and how do trees offer a solution? And again, emphasizing that we're talking about nearby nature. We're talking about nature that may be in your own and around your own home, because we know that a lot of the tree canopy efforts they're not successful if people are not planting or retaining trees on private property parcels, and the value of other natural systems in the city. And I mention this because there have been several studies that have done, and when you say nature and health to many people in America, they think of the national parks. They think of getting away from the city. They don't realize that intermittent, brief moments of respite in nature in their everyday life is quite valuable. So that's another kind of obstacle that we have as we communicate about all of this. And policy, it's starting to take shape. One is the 10-minute walk as a recommendation, that everyone can find quality nature within a 10-minute walk of their home. And the Trust for Public Land, for instance, has adopted this as a national policy statement. And I've noticed that some mayors who have an interest in nature as a social determinant of health are promoting the 10-minute walk. All right, to the question about biodiversity or about restoration. Ecologists, I would say in the last 5 years or so, ecologists have started to become more active in the nature and health research realm. So here's one, for instance, where they looked at vegetation cover and they looked at afternoon bird abundance. Now, this is not necessarily entirely native vegetation, but again, the degree of vegetation within view of people within a certain walking distance. And what they found was that with greater biodiversity and more bird abundance, they found a relationship with less depression, less anxiety, and less stress. And there are other studies showing, in particular with mental health, that increased biodiversity in these nature experiences promote better mental health. Again, we don't know why. Most of these studies are correlational. You have some sort of nature situation, you have some sort of health outcome, a statistical relationship. People are now attempting to dig into why we see these sorts of connections. So there's, in terms of the question or the comment about biodiversity, restoration, and so on, and restoration in the ecological sense, we are seeing some of these studies showing that there is advantage in having biodiversity. Another expression of this, again, though it's not native vegetation, this is a study that was done by Bill Sullivan and his colleagues at the University of Illinois, and it was a lab experiment. So what they did was to set up a series of images that are simulations of different percentages of canopy cover from 0 to 60%. So you see a few of the images. So people who came into the lab they were given a stress-inducing activity. I think it was something like calculate arithmetic or multiplication tables in your brain while in front of an audience. Now, there you go. Public speaking and math combined, that's stress. And then people were taken or in a situation where they viewed not all of the images, but a portion of the images. So here are the results. The red line, the forest simulation, that was controlled. So that's a fairly steady line. Then the blue indicates stress reduction. So the higher the number or the higher the blue line means less stress. It's an inverse relationship. So what we see here is really interesting. You know, there's some jags in the blue line, but nonetheless, there's a fairly consistent correlation with more canopy cover. But look there at about 35 to 40%. The recovery rate kind of levels off. We've been talking about canopy cover goals of, say, pursuing up to 40% for decades, coming out of the professional practice side of urban forestry. Here we have a health component, reinforcing that idea that certain levels of canopy cover as goals may influence health. Forest bathing, that is just taking off in interest. Really solid research has come out of Japan, South Korea, Northern Europe, and now here in the United States. And this is, the forest immersion events range from several days away, which is what's happening in Japan now. They have forest bathing bases that are being used to promote economic development in rural communities. But it can be as brief as half an hour as well. And the array of benefits, lots of different benefits. And these, again, this is some of the better science about these relationships. One thing that's really interesting is they think, particularly the investigators in Japan think the volatile compounds emitted by the trees, the phytoncides, are what offer some of these benefits. Not quite sure how they interact, but they have seen by measuring the level of phytoncides and then these health outcomes, they do see those relationships. And I'm seeing a comment about large conifers. Certainly those trees emit these materials, and so it may be of benefit then to be walking through or immersed in our native forest areas. And there are people who are taking this up as a professional outlet or a professional opportunity. There are certification programs, Japan, Korea, Germany, and now one based in California. And I've met people who've done this training, and they're looking for what is their niche. Is it as a program in a recreation department, or is it as a therapeutic service in a hospital and care system? Both are happening, though still in flux. All right, how can green space planning protect and promote human health? Dosage. Really interesting research coming along now on dosage. This is one of the topics on the forefront of this research, because we want to be able to say with greater conviction how much, how often, and so on. So here's a few studies. You see, they're not necessarily consistent. What do we see as consistency? Doesn't take a lot of time. Doesn't take a lot of time, and you don't have to go far away. So for stress reduction, some early studies by Roger Ulrich, who did that hospital study. He also did some of the early stress. The bar figures of being stressed, seeing green, minutes of, and you start to see stress recovery. So here was an article just a year ago showing that 20-30 minutes can be really valuable. Likewise, blood pressure reduction. And in this one, people were encouraged to be outdoors and moving around on a weekly basis. That's another thing we're trying to understand, is what is the durability of these effects? What is the intermittence, or how often might you have to go out and pursue these experiences? I have read so many of these articles. I've tried to take this into my life. Getting up, being active once every 2 hours or so if possible, and going outdoors and doing that if I can. Depression reduction. 1 garden visit per week appeared to help, but optimal benefit was at 4 to 5 garden visits per week. So a little is good, more is better. And then finally, well-being, general well-being. They found that a total of 120 minutes a week was kind of the minimum, but if you participate 200 to 300 minutes, even better. Dosage, so this starts to play into access to the planning, urban planning of green systems for the sake of health, starting to converge the evidence with the policy. All right, equity. With the opportunity for big data analysis, when I was in grad school, I did map-based spatial analysis of landscapes. Maybe some of you remember this, right? Type up key cards. Take the cards to the computer center. They run them through a device. It goes to the computer. 12 hours later, you go pick up your map. And if you made any error, or you'd like to do another analysis, you start the whole thing over. The lag time. It's incredible to me now how quickly we can access GIS, access spatial data sets, not we meaning scientists, we meaning anyone. So because of that access, we now see lots of reveal of the discrepancies and inequities of the distribution of greening. So here, this was done in several cities in Illinois, and they found distribution discrepancies in urban forest canopy. Not surprising, a lot of those discrepancies were associated with lower socioeconomic neighborhoods. Not unusual, and we're seeing this with parks analysis, as well as other green analysis. Here in Seattle, canopy analysis was done a few years ago, and thanks to Sandra, she shared these maps with me. And what did we find? Not only the distribution of the canopy and the percentage canopy cover, but there was some secondary analysis about distribution in relationship to demographics. So here we see density of canopy by census tracts, if I remember. I believe that's the census tracts, or maybe it's the neighborhoods that are the basis of urban planning for the city. Anyway, you can see that geographically there's quite a difference in the amount of trees in different neighborhoods. Here's another layer of that. Yeah, these are the census tracts then. What we see here is deeper green of the outlined area. The polygon indicates more people of color. And often with that associated is lower socioeconomic status. Then the size of the circle within those polygons is indicative of the percent tree canopy. So look at that. What relationships do you see? What are some patterns? If anybody wants to speak up or type in, or maybe it's just totally obvious to everyone. Generally, oh, Barbara's speaking, but no microphone.
I said, I don't understand it right now. Could
Oh,
someone
okay.
explain it?
I know. It takes a little while to wrap your brain, particularly late in the day like this, around something like this. But generally, and again, it's not uniform, and that's what makes it difficult to interpret. Generally, we see fewer trees in those places with more with more diversity, with more people of color. And this may not be much easier to interpret, but it's the same data. And what we see is not many people of color and lots of tree canopy down there on the lower right. Top left, lots of people of color and less or very little tree canopy. And again, there's quite a scatter in these data, all those little circles, but there is a general trending. And my understanding, and Kim could probably speak about this a great deal more, but my understanding is ongoing efforts to boost tree canopy percentage in the city is committed to environmental equity and committed to authentic and genuine interaction and engagement with the communities to try to boost tree planting and tree restoration.
Kathy, there's an online study that the city of Seattle did in preparation for updating its urban forest management plan. I posted the link in the chat session, and it shows a public meeting with the Black and Latin community members and their thoughts and feelings about why they didn't have a lot of nice trees in the poor neighborhoods. And also, there's a separate report for each of the various ethnic minorities. There's a really good report on the Indians, the Native Americans, who said that they really love cedar trees. We should be planting more cedar trees because those are used for carving and for ceremonial items. And then there's a Horn of Africa meeting report, and the whole process really gives a lot of insight into a different way of considering trees.
Is this Michael?
Yes, yeah, I'm Michael Oxman.
Yeah, hi Michael. Thank you for sharing that. And I see that you did provide a link in the chat box. So those are probably the resources then where people could learn more. Again, given the time that I have, this was a very, very brief overview, but certainly there are opportunities to learn more. And so what we see, not only in Seattle, but in other cities as well, again, is this reckoning that trees are of value. Environmental services, that was kind of the first wave of communication, but now health services as well, or cultural services. And I'm not quite sure yet how that translates into policy, and that I know is the struggle and dilemma that some of you are working on here now in the city of Seattle. So we have opportunities, we have a variety of situations and places to either retain trees or to reconstruct these green spaces that do have these health values. And that can range from individual trees that people have an affinity for, that they just have to trample through the, whatever that is, Vinca minor, to touch that tree, to connect with it, or moving into the canopy and moving into the space created by those branches and the foliage. And the social relationship with those trees. I'm not sure that we have tapped the stories and the communication about communication about relationship over time that people have with trees as a part of the compelling arguments for why we need to retain trees in the city. And some of you I know are you're very dedicated. You've been working on this for years. I offer sort of that evidence voice, but the story voice and these connections with trees are equally important. And what I see happen, these are some images from my own community, and this was a quote. What is the location in British Columbia? Is it Capilano? It's a forest reserve, tourist destination. But they have some tree quotes sprinkled about. And I really enjoyed this one because it emphasizes the rift that we feel in our communities, where some people have no sense at all of what the value of these living things is, and others of us feel literally grief as they disappear from our surroundings. And this was, as I bike commute last summer, this was a place that I observed over a very short time. It was about 2 weeks, this clearing and grading and hauling away the trees. And what struck me was what we achieved with mechanization, how quickly this happens. In my own neighborhood, there are still cedar stumps that have the notches in them for the springboards, so that people were using crosscut saws and sawing down these trees close to a century ago now in the community where I live. But that sort of removal of trees can happen in such a short time because of the mechanization. And I've actually at times stopped and talked to the people operating this equipment. It wasn't a particularly comfortable conversation, but they seemed to take a pride in how quickly they could do this and how clean, the tidiness, and let's make everything clean. So their connection to all of this is very different. And there are whole industries dedicated to clearing, land clearing, businesses to make this happen very quickly. So, in summary, we have lots of benefits. The evidence of and confirming the intuitions that we feel. And this evidence suggests that on one hand, trees are protective of our health. They help prevent us from moving into disease and disorder, but they're also therapeutic. In some instances, they actually help us to heal if we have indeed become ill or have need for treatment. And the evidence shows that more and larger trees tend to provide greater benefit. Tree canopy, large trees, immersion, forest bathing, and so on. And more, equity and social determinants of health are part of this conversation, not as much as we'd like, but becoming more so. And then the battle, tree retention and promotion, or tree retention and preservation, really difficult. And again, I know some of you are on the forefront of that activity. So we have about 15 minutes. Charlie, I'll leave it to you, but questions, comments, open it up now for that. And again, kind of open mic, anybody who would like to chime in.
Yeah, while folks are pondering questions to ask, Kathy, I just want to check in with you. Yeah, we only have 15 minutes left, so we could do discussion the rest of our time if you'd like. Or I don't know what if there's a couple points in your final section that you think would be valuable for the group.
Let me see here. So while people are thinking about questions, I will move to number 2, the second session piece here.
I do want to allow a little bit of time to reflect and discuss anything that came up in this last section. I do appreciate a lot of folks are sharing resources, maps. There's a lot of really cool interactive maps online that folks are sharing and resources. Kim just shared a really great sounding podcast I've never heard of. I'm excited to dive into that if somebody enjoys podcasts. Great. Any other questions? Kathy, we have some folks asking if it's okay if they share, if you share this PowerPoint with us sharing out this PowerPoint to participants.
Yeah, of course. I'll send you the file.
Great. Any other questions to that last topic? Well,
Kathy?
oh, Janet, yes.
Hi.
Yes.
Hi, Kathy. I don't know if you remember me from the urban forestry group that we were in Olympia a long time ago. But
Yes. Hi.
yeah, it's great to see you. So I wanted to ask you if you could, one of the points that I've been talking to people about is, climate change, and trying to make the point to, some of these city planners and, whatever group that's thinking they need to cut down every single tree in order to proceed with their development, is that these large trees are some of the best weapons against climate change, because and that even if a development can preserve just even a percentage, a small percentage of them is better than cutting them all down, obviously. And it just seems like that argument should hold some value for people who only want to advocate, for affordable housing, density, et cetera, and that we have to sacrifice all the trees in the urban area because we have to prevent development in the suburbs or something. And so it seems like the climate change argument is one of the most powerful.
I'm observing that as well, and not to pitch it as climate solution, but again to identify what are the changes associated with climate change, be it urban heat concentration, be it changing precipitation patterns, air quality, diminishing air quality because of different weather patterns, and then offering the value of trees in addressing those situations. But the challenge we face is the parcel by parcel. While there are decision makers, I think, who recognize these things on a city scale or maybe even a community scale, when it comes down to the private property decisions, and again, as I understand it, without the regulatory code to insert these benefits into the development process, it's really difficult. I don't know if anybody reaches out to real estate people. I have a hunch that they can be quite influential in all of this. When we bought our home, for instance, and then I have 3 brothers who build homes in Pierce County. And so we talk about this, and realtors will make these claims about, well, this is the market and this square footage, the 10,000 square footage that's what everyone wants, that kind of thing. We don't accommodate the possibility of smaller building footprints, different household configurations. It's the market. And the market at this point doesn't incorporate trees as an element on that parcel design very well.
Yeah.
There are some exceptions, but generally. So I don't know if we're reaching, a very influential industry, the real estate market.
A comment on the value of a tree. Today I was looking at a tree across the street from Benaroya Hall, and they just built this $400 million 40-story skyscraper there. And there's trees along the curb around the outside edge of the building. But the one tree that's parked in the lot is dead. It's died in the last month or so. So that's a $400 million tree. And it didn't get the emphasis that it should have to keep it alive and keep it watered. But I just want to also point out the new software mapping applications. I put it in the comments section. treemama.org has a new phone app that you can download to your phone. It's called I See Tree. You just measure the diameter of the tree, get the type of tree, and put it on the map. So if we can steer our data collection protocols to highlight human health, then I think that would help us if we were talking the same language as you social scientists over there, Kathy.
Shared language is always good.
So I'm looking at the time. We are less than 10 minutes away from our ending time. So Kathy, do you want to continue the conversation, or are there any other points that you want to make that are on their slides?
Let me look across this section of the slides and see if there are any.
Yeah. While you're looking, I wanted to follow up on Janet's issue with climate change. I don't know why people don't identify with the destruction of trees, even on single-family lots. It seems like every developer just wipes everything out. And no matter how small a footprint you have, all the trees leave at once. But why aren't people identifying the destruction of trees as part of the battle on climate change? I mean, they are the frontline defense and carbon sequestration. They're the only objects out there that are actually doing the job on reducing carbon in the atmosphere. And it's frustrating to me that it seems like there's not much consciousness about that. Think globally, act locally. Why don't we see it that we need to act locally?
I share that frustration in that, again, I'll reflect back on my experience with this class, this graduate class a couple of days ago. The students a couple of them were very direct. It's like, why are we even talking about nature and health? What's the relevance? Why there's so many important things happening. And that is really a struggle. Yes, there are important things happening in the moment, but that seems to be the prevailing, getting our attention for these momentary flare-ups, and people aren't thinking about the deeper long-term consequences of decisions that we make in our communities. How do we step out of that? I don't know. I mean, in my humble way here, I carry this evidence to any group that is would like to hear, nationally and internationally. But the pace then of follow-up to change of policy and practices is very slow. And so I can't offer any good thoughts other than Margaret Mead, and never underestimate the power of passionate people. That's kind of where we're at here. No, I can't even go into politics. We don't have enough time for that, right? But if there were leadership that would pay a little more attention to less than momentary issues, that could be helpful.
This is Steve Zemke. I'm on the Seattle Urban Forestry Commission, and we've been working for basically 11 years trying to update the tree ordinance, and want to give a positive side to that in the sense that the Urban Forestry Commission did release a draft last year of the updated tree ordinance. It is being looked at by the city. The city is committed to make a number of updates, and on the short time scale, within the next month, I noted they will be releasing what they've been working on for about 6 or 7 months, an update to what's called the Director's Exceptional Tree Rule, which was working to give more protection to the large trees in the city. They're proposing adding more trees to be covered as exceptional, and lowering the size on the upper limit for the trees to from 30 inches down to 24 inches. It's there will be a draft coming out. There will be a 1-month public comment period. So I urge people to look for that. The people working on it say that we will need to get response in from citizens to say that, yes, we like what they're doing. Among other things, it will include licensing of tree care providers, and they are also working on the entering of the tree loss and replacement within the Acela database system. So I'd say that we're in sort of the final process of getting a number of things done, and so urge people to keep an eye watching what's going on. You can check out the postings on the Seattle Urban Forestry Commission, among other things, for what is happening.
Great. Thanks so much, Steve. So I think this was a good final discussion to have. We unfortunately only have a couple minutes left. Kathy, do you have any final things to wrap up with?
I really don't. I don't think there's much value in entering this second section. It is about mental health in particular and response to trees. Maybe you can see some of the slides on my screen. This particular facet of health has been getting a lot of attention in the last couple of months as people are in their homes, isolated, not able to get out. I think maybe this is a moment where maybe there is an elevated awareness of the need to be outdoors and what we gain from doing so. And so to provide some specifics about those general reactions, those general feelings, those intuitions, I'm hoping I've provided some of that for you. That if there is an opportunity with the press, with a thought leader, with a public official, that you can tick off 2-3 things that relate to trees and health that may help boost the message. In terms of mental health, studies show reduced depression, be it merely seeing trees or walking in their midst. And there's also benefit, there's a couple of slides down there about attention restoration theory, in that seeing nature, contact with nature helps us restore these capacities to focus, pay attention, and sit in on yet another Zoom webinar. So with that, I'll leave the content here, Charlie and everyone with Forterra and also the City of Seattle. Thanks for the opportunity to share this. And I'll note also for those of you, an option with Zoom, there've been a lot of great links and comments. If you go to that chat box, there's a little box on the bottom right with 3 little dots. If you click on that, it will save the chat to a text file that you can go back to and grab some of that information.
I also could use some help, Kathy, if anybody wants to help with a Stay Healthy Street tree walk. I put about, I don't know, a couple dozen photos of the high point trees in West Seattle where the streets was just closed off. So that's one thing that people can do while they have plenty of time on their hands. And I put the link to all the photos in the chat section.
Great. Well, thank you so much, everybody. I will go through also a lot of these links, and I can send a follow-up email with a lot of these resources that were shared and that Kathy mentioned. Kathy, where can people go if they want to find more about the mental health benefits of trees in urban spaces?
I'm trying to think. So I have a colleague, 2 colleagues in my school, Greg Bratman, B-R-A-T-M-A-N, has done some really nice work of late, but it's academic publication. Peter Kahn, K-A-H-N, also an environmental psychologist, and he's written some books that are very pleasant to read, not quite as academic. Aside from that, yeah. Oh, the forest bathing literature. There's some nice books that have come out lately about forest bathing. That would be another place.
Great. Allie, did you have a resource that you wanted to share about that?
I just sent one from the Nature Conservancy, but there are several. So if you're just interested in kind of those factoids to share in a tree walk or things like that. Also, the Vibrant Cities Lab is fantastic. So always like to shout them out as well.
Thank you. Great. Well, again, thanks everyone for attending. I'm sorry our time went so quickly. Clearly, this is a topic that 90 minutes was not enough time to fully discuss, but I hope that you were exposed to some really fascinating case studies and some articles that you can explore a little bit more on your own. Just to take a step back with our program overall, if you aren't familiar, the Tree Ambassadors, we just released our new app, the Tree Walk app, in April for Earth Day, and it's really cool. If you've never been on a tree walk before, you can take a self-guided virtual one, while we can't have public ones at the moment. So yeah, download that app. Just go to Seattle Tree Walk and just search that in an app store for iPhones and Androids. Also, in a couple of weeks, we'll be releasing our 2020 list of trees for neighborhoods trees, which Lou is cheering for. He's the one who's heading that up. He was given a sneak peek at some of the trees that he was going to be putting in the comments if you were following that. A lot of conifers, and looks like we're focusing in our South Seattle communities for that. So if you are interested in getting some trees from the city for free, to check that out. It's a really awesome program. And yeah, and if you signed up for this, we have your email. You'll be getting monthly updates for the Trees for Seattle program. We'll let you know on further upcoming workshops. We're hoping to have another one in late summer, early fall, topic to be determined. And then we'll also keep you updated on other events when we start holding volunteer stewardship events again, and just other really interesting tree news that's happening in the city of Seattle. Again, I want to thank Kathy Wolf for taking the time to share your amazing expertise. We can give you a round of applause. Yes, thank you so much. And yeah, I'll send out a follow-up email in the next day or two of some of these resources. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.